A new independent study, as you've been hearing, reveals, quote, deep systemic challenges in Calgary's water infrastructure, challenges that eventually led to 2024's catastrophic feeder main break. Among the recommendations to City Council, a complete restructuring of how the utility should be managed and speeding up the build of a new water line. This comes as the city is up to its rear end in a second rupture on the same Bears Paw South feeder main. Former ATCO executive Siegfried Kiefer is the chair of the Independent Water Review Panel and the lead author of the report, and he joins us now in studio. So the report points out systemic problems that eventually led to the 2024 break. What are the problems?
The problems that we uncovered in our investigation were that the risk management and asset management processes that the city is employing on this critical infrastructure are less robust than what critical infrastructure demands. And so when I say less robust, they were incomplete, not as thorough as we would expect to have found. And that, as a consequence of that, was that the appropriate information in terms of the consequences of deferral or delay of certain activities were not well understood by the decision makers over this period of time.
Explain that, because as I read your report, there are these nodes where, okay, we've identified the risk, or somebody has identified the risk, and this happens repeatedly over the course of 20 years. So what did you find in terms of why didn't that get to who it needed to, or why wasn't it actioned? Who's to blame, I suppose?
Yeah, that's a common question that we've been having since we wrote our report. The typical process that you would follow in a risk management system for an asset-based company would be that risk assessments are completed on an annual or more frequent basis. Risks that are identified in terms of reliability of infrastructure are then flagged in a risk registry. Each of those risks would then be assigned to a manager or above level individual with a due date to identify a plan to mitigate that risk, and then it's typically tracked through your management control systems all the way up to your audit committees to ensure that that action is actually executed upon and that risk is mitigated. And it's the latter part of that process that was incomplete in the city.
What do you mean? What happened?
The risks were identified, and we flagged on many occasions that inspections on this particular segment of line were scheduled or were identified that they needed to be done in 2017, 2019, 2022, and they were just getting to doing those in 2024 and were scheduled to complete an inspection. Unfortunately, the rupture preempted that and occurred before they were able to do their inspection. But that delay, that continual deferral, was a result of really an assessment in terms of management that attacking events that were more likely to occur, which are typically smaller ruptures in smaller pieces of pipe, were more beneficial to Calgarians than worrying about high consequence but low likelihood types of ruptures. And it's really about changing that mindset to ensure that, the high consequence events are things that you really need to make sure you've mitigated properly.
There's this critical touch point in the way our city operates, which is, city administration, senior administration, the bureaucracy at the city, and the elected officials who vote and make decisions. Who knew what, and how was that communication and that relationship, that touch point between city admin and council and mayors, how did that work? This particular pipe, despite having seen a rupture in 2004, having been on the risk registry since that time in terms of that vintage of pipe being a potential issue for the city, did not make it onto the enterprise risk summary that council was informed with. While there was a blanket statement around infrastructure challenges, at least in our investigation, we could never see specifically the identification of PCCP pipe failing
on the Bears Paw South feeder main, flagged up the decision pole to council, and the city's a big operation. It has over 60 lines of business. There's obviously no way that council can digest a risk registry for each line of business and delve into every line item detail. But the choices of what is flagged and what does go forward is a really critical function of management. And typically, in industry, you would have an expert body of oversight, typically your board of directors, that would challenge management on its thinking and ensure that the long-term interests are being properly taken care of.
And you are more or less proposing that now,
essentially
breaking it out a separate water utility management.
Yeah, our recommendations in terms of fixing the issues that allowed this situation to arise really go to threefold. Fix your processes so they are complete and robust. Restructure your management team so there's clear accountability and responsibility and authority to act by management. And create an oversight body that with, I'm going to say, pertinent expertise that can be a valid sounding board and challenge point for management's thinking that is independent of administration and independent of council.
You're also proposing a real speeding up of building this redundancy, the pipe, which is a project that's on the books now. It's underway. But how, do you have a sense that what you're proposing can be done?
Absolutely. The urgency that is necessary at the moment is to get a replacement pipe in for this segment as quickly as possible. We are living with something that has deteriorated to the point that it is no longer a reliable element in the service delivery for Calgary.
To be clear, you're not talking about the fix on this part that's ruptured now. We're talking about another line.
A new steel line running in parallel to the current one that would allow you to take the current line out of service and do a proper end-to-end repair and restoration. And we would recommend that we keep, at the end of the day, both lines in service to give the proper redundancy to a critical artery that feeds up to 60% of Calgary's potable water into the system.
We're hearing the mayor in the news and otherwise saying to council colleagues, let us spare no expense. What should Calgarians prepare themselves for then in terms of costing the things you're proposing?
Yeah, it's a 6-kilometer stretch of line. It is a large diameter pipe, and it is going through well-established neighborhoods and roadways. This is not for the, there are methods that could be used, such as boring, that would be less disruptive to getting the job done, but they take time and are higher risk in terms of actual completion than your traditional kind of open cut, lay the pipe in a trench where you can see it all the way along, close it up and put it into service. I think time is the most important element we're dealing with here, and while accelerating the installation of a second pipe could cost some percentage more than taking your time and allowing 2 or 3 years to go by before it's in service. We just don't have the luxury of that. We're dealing with a network of assets that is in excess of $3 billion. This pipe will cost somewhere between $200 and $250 million to put into place. It's a small price to pay on the acceleration to give us the peace of mind that we will not be in water restrictions sporadically over the next 2 or 3 years.
Now, I know you set out to figure out what went wrong and how we get over that. Now, of course, the politics is part of the one dimension of this. Politics swirl around it. And I think people rightly want accountability on this. And I want to go out on this. I understand we're going to speak with former Calgary mayor, 3-term mayor, all in this 20-year span that you had a close look at, Naheed Nenshi, who now runs the NDP or leads the NDP. You had a conversation last night with Mr. Nenshi. what can you tell us about that, or what questions do you have coming out of that?
Yeah, obviously, Nahid Nenshi had taken an interest in reading our report, and he certainly wanted some clarification in terms of our findings and our recommendations. I would generally say, after discussing it with him, he was supportive that what we were recommending made sense to him, and he would probably echo some of the comments I've made around insufficient information around critical activities, making it clearly to council over his term of service. He mentioned that he had often taken the time to try to probe administration more deeply on some of these things. But where we could agree is that insufficient detail was provided all the way up the chain to senior executives in the administration and hence into council.
Yeah. All right. Good of you to come in to speak with us about this. Thank you very much. I mean, Calgarians are paying very close attention at this point.
If I could just add one comment in our report. The report really deals with 3 time frames for the recommendations. There's the emergency recommendations, which are to get our second piece of pipe in place so that we're not dependent on failing infrastructure for this 60% of our potable water. The near-term recommendations really deal with restructuring the management team, fixing our asset management processes, and putting in place some expert oversight capacity. And in the longer term, we believe a corporate structure lends itself to entrenching that principle of accountable management, long-term thinking around these long-term, long lead time assets, which really span
arm's length city corp that oversees the water utility.
And their mandate extends well beyond any one term of council and probably longer than any one administration. And so it's really that long-term thinking that needs to be re-entrenched in the operation of this water utility.